Richard, hello. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you, Phelan. Very well. Sounds like it's been a very interesting conversation here for throughout the day in San Diego.
Oh yes, very thick and full agenda. We've had a lot of topics. We've looked at the SOC of the future, as you've just seen. We've looked at skills gaps. We've looked at how you stop the MSS getting, becoming flavor of the month to attack, especially during COVID. And of course, we cannot forget the very crucial sector of healthcare. And I guess you're going to think, should we develop a healthcare MSS? Or what should we do for healthcare security during this crisis? Richard, the floor is yours to moderate.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so we're going to have a conversation here about a very topical industry. I'm sure healthcare is front and center for most of us during this global pandemic right now, and it's putting a lot of extra strain and stress on those of us that are in leadership roles in security, where we're having to reevaluate the types of security policies and controls that we have in place to defend our noble doctors and nurses from attack, from cyber attack, right? From an increase in ransomware and of course our friendly neighborhood nation state attackers out to steal our formulations for COVID cures, which hopefully are not too far away now, because I would really like to get back on a plane at some point in the near future. But before we get into that, I'd like to hand things over to my panelists here to give a brief introduction about themselves and what they do and what it is that keeps them up at night. What are your concerns? They're all security leaders here in the healthcare space. So what is it that keeps you up at night, and what is it that you feel that is of concern and you'd like to share with us today? Esmond, why don't you kick us off, since you're an old hat at this?
Sure. So I work for Stewart Healthcare. It's a 9-state for-profit healthcare system. We're overcoming some investment challenges. We're also going through that same digital transformation that I heard earlier. The prior panel was talking about the journey to a next generation SOC and the role that MSS can play. We're on a journey to a next generation hospital, and what a smart hospital looks like is based upon our smart physicians and those investments in talent that you described earlier. Now, the second part of your question is what's keeping me up at night. I'm getting old, so it's usually heartburn, but beyond heartburn, associated with some of our imbibing activities throughout COVID, it's typically ransomware. It's your blind spots. It's what you don't know will ruin your day, if not week, and the 60-day time frame we have to report out to OCR. Hopefully that answers your question.
Right, you have to cut down on the spicy food, Esmond, or the bourbon, or whatever you're washing the spicy food down with. So,
yep.
But I think these are stressful times for all of us at the moment. So we're all working around the clock. So over to Christian. Christian, give us a brief introduction of yourself and what Keck's up to, and tell us what it is that keeps you up at night.
Absolutely. Good afternoon. Christian Abajadi. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Keck Medicine of USC. Thank you for having me on this panel. What keeps me up at night, honestly, just being a step ahead of everybody that's trying to get into our environment and do something that is not appropriate or do something to hurt us, something that I believe we all try to fight against on a daily basis. Also, with the changes that we're going through in the environment related to services that we offer, that we have to adapt in such a fast changing type of environment to accommodate our patient care practices and services that we offer, introduces new complexity to our environment, and things that have to change as a result of not phasing them in, but rather taking almost a sledgehammer approach to bringing these new services into action, which normally translates into potential training gaps and so on and so forth to help augment your staff to accommodate these new technologies that you put out, new workflows and so on that introduce new security challenges. That's mainly what's keeping me up at night nowadays. With the digital world transformation that we're going through, something similar to what Esmond mentioned, it introduces new challenges that we quite often don't think about in that component type approach to things. So we're not applying a solution to every step that we take. and more of a blanket approach to the security aspect of it. So that's primarily what's keeping me up at night, and a little bit of hot, spicy food as well, just like Esmond mentioned.
Washed down with the occasional bourbon, maybe, I don't know, but anyway, yeah. And I think to your point there, Christian, I think most healthcare delivery organizations have had to pivot extremely quickly, right? We have undergone since February years worth of digital transformation and adaptation purely to cater for the current environment, right? And that's challenged all of us, I believe.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Brett, over to you. You look like you're at the lake today, and
I was actually in Colorado a couple weeks ago. It was funny that Harry, a couple panels ago, mentioned Crested Butte, Colorado. I was actually right near there a couple weeks ago and took this picture while I was out there. So I was like, had to throw it up, just a little shout out to him. Yeah, my name's Brett Cattell, Director of Systems for Robin Healthcare. A big part of the things I do is compliance, as well as integrating our systems into the healthcare environments and with the EMR systems and into our clients' physical networks and installing those pieces. So that's a lot of things I do. And probably some of the things that really keep that are forefront of my mind is really just around the savings of cost savings that we're able to go through and implement that, especially for a lot of the clinics and hospitals. You would kind of think, like with COVID, everybody going to the hospital, it'd be crazy. You know, you would think that healthcare business would be booming, but that's really just a small section of that healthcare industry, just the emergency room type of stuff. Everybody else, all the elective surgeries, all of those pieces with the telehealth and pieces like that. A lot of normal doctors, practitioners, like orthopedics, ears, nose, and throat, all of those things got put off. And so there's a lot of missed paychecks, let's put it that way, from a lot of the people inside of that healthcare industry. So really reevaluating, there's so many costs and so much expenses that go into it, and really just trying to find ways to be able to make those businesses survive and not have to, kind of fall in line and be able to get succumb to the very, very big guys and get gobbled up and still be able to thrive as independent practices.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to say there that everyone is avoiding the doctor like the plague right now, but it's probably not appropriate or politically correct, But I think you raised a very important point there, right? A lot of the revenue streams for our traditional healthcare model have changed, right? People are not undergoing the elective surgeries. Maybe Beverly Hills, plastic surgeons are still busy. I don't know. They seem to be extremely busy most of the year, but I think most of us have put off, going in for our cancer screenings and some of the less desirable things that we may have to visit the doctor for. And the question is, how long can these practices survive, right, when no one's there? We're already beginning to see some financial issues with various healthcare delivery organizations, with people being furloughed for a very long period of time, people being laid off, right? And massive work from home, which is leading to perhaps jobs not being done on site that otherwise would have been done, thereby introducing security risks, right? So I think that causes us again to have to pivot from a financial perspective, and an operational perspective as well. But yeah, so my first question, and I'd like Esmond to kick this one off, if you would, please, Esmond. I want to talk about security resources, right? With so many staff being furloughed, with work from home, how are you attracting and retaining top security talent in this highly competitive market? Especially in some of the the more competitive areas. I know Steward Health is nationally based, right? But Southern California, the San Diego area is extremely competitive, right? As Christian knows, works in the space and probably trying to hire people out of San Diego right now if he's got openings. But how do we compete in this space, and how do we attract and retain top security talent to protect ourselves from these types of threats that we're seeing today? You mentioned ransomware earlier as an example.
Yeah, So I'll be honest with you, it's a challenge. It's one of the advantages you get from partnering with an MSS or any of these kind of strategic cybersecurity resources. Is when you partner appropriately, they bring that talent pool to you. And should they go through that churn, or they suffer from not just attracting but unable to retain, this is the benefit. If you partner with the right cybersecurity vendor, you're partnering with somebody who has a tested and tried plan in attracting, recruiting, retaining, fostering, developing, building, and when that team turns over, doing it again, right? That's one of the advantages, in my opinion, that an MSS brings to the table. But if you are in the business of healthcare, you automatically, when you're approaching your staffing strategy, you're working at a disadvantage. You typically don't have that same financial incentives. You may or may not pay bonuses. You may not be able to compete with the upper end of the healthcare spectrum, the insurance and the pharmaceutical wings. If you're doing the healthcare delivery organizations, you're automatically having to work at a disadvantage. You're not going to be able to pay the same. And that's before you get to finance. So what I found successful is to look at a lot of universities, look at a lot of building as a strategy. Look at people that don't necessarily have all of the bona fides, all of the certifications that might be required in finance, but they have the aptitude, they have the passion. That kind of ability to persevere takes you a long way in any cybersecurity discipline, and it's a huge strength in security. I tend to have to focus on some of those soft skills and perhaps train for the hard skills. But the nature of the disciplines that we're exposing people to, cybersecurity is going through this exponential increase in complexity. It used to be 5 guys in a firewall. Now we're talking about AI and machine learning, right? You need to be ahead of the curve. You need to be continually recruiting. You need to know what are the market conditions, not just for your own career, but also the people you're trying to attract. And once they're attracted, then it becomes this huge burden of retention, right? Are you creating an environment which isn't just the crisis at the minute? Are you burning out and fatigue, which is a huge element of all of our careers? And COVID adds to that burden. Now all of a sudden, it's of no value if you do have a crisis like COVID or a crisis like the latest incident, if you don't have a plan. So this is now your ability to demonstrate the business value, the cultural challenge that you're overcoming, the digital transformation that we heard Christian and Brett touch upon. Now is your opportunity to strike and talk about how security can accelerate. If they do have to take some abbreviated measures or shortcuts, they're not going to be long-term. As you described, OCR and some of these regulators have allowed some discretion throughout this pandemic. It's not going to be there for a long time, so we need to look at that from a staffing perspective to make sure that we're not burning out people and doing less with less. If we want to do more with less, are we investing in our staff? Are we retaining them? Are we training them? Are we preparing them for career development? You hope that that's with your organization. But, I look at this as being a life cycle. If I lose a staff member, hopefully for very valid reasons, for an advancement opportunity I wasn't able to foster, that's to their credit. And I hope when they go out, they become my ambassador and they become my evangelist to send people towards me that I can coach and develop on their journey towards becoming the CISO. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Very, very comprehensive answer. Thank you very much for sharing that. One thing I wanted to pick up on, you mentioned about, the growth of AI, right? Offensive AI, defensive AI, right? Subject that I've presented on in my HIMSS in the past. These are growing concerns, right? The cybersecurity landscape doesn't stay the same. So it makes it difficult for MSSPs to package solution sets and to take those solution sets across industry, where there are healthcare specific concerns around protecting things like patient safety, for example. Christian, you're in the thick of things here in Southern California. How is Keck managing to retain staff in a highly competitive and highly expensive environment, and also at the same time build up the skill sets necessary to protect against things like AI and machine learning and other forms of technology or other technologies that are impacting healthcare.
So what Esmond said makes absolute sense, and it's spot on. I will tell you that on top of all the challenges, especially in Southern California, one of the most important things that you have to do as an organization, you have to be evolving your security postures as well to actually attract the talent, not just from a compensation perspective, but also from a desire to get involved and really introduce themselves to new technologies and make a change perspective. Healthcare for the longest time has been a relatively static environment. And what I mean by that, we do what we need to get the job done within guidelines, because change for us is really dangerous, right? As you introduce new things into our environment, complexity can be translated into an impact to patient care. Well, now we're starting to take a slightly different approach to how we're dealing with the situation. And what that entails, it's truly leveraging things like AI in a way that makes us more so in the driver's seat rather than someone who's following me, if you would. I do believe COVID and the situation around COVID is allowing us to look at new technologies, which is allowing our staff, our resources, to be attracted more to advancements that we're doing in this field further than others. Southern California is a very, very challenging environment, and I would be not telling you the truth if I said I have not had to deal with that specifically in our environment with resources, looking at alternate places. What's interesting is in Southern California, one of the challenges is your driving distance, your proximity of where you live to work. Well, now all these things are starting to go away with COVID. So I think that's one of these opportunities where there's maybe some level of positive that's coming from it regarding resources. But the main caption, if I had to pick one single item, it would be continuing to evolve and introduce new ways of doing things and making the technology of security and our practices exciting. That's how we've been successful the most in retaining the talent that we have.
Yeah, I would agree with you entirely there. I mean, and I think there are some great opportunities right now, right? We've moved to a workforce in healthcare that is largely remote outside of clinical staff, right? We've got a much broader perimeter than we ever had before, because instead of 20,000 people working in one or two locations, we've now got 20,000 locations, right? As everyone works from home. These are challenges that means that we need to be secured. But do we have the right skill sets? And this is something I want to throw over to Brett. Do we have the right skill sets in order to cope with these new challenges, right? Do MSSPs provide a level of generalists that can supplement, the boots on the ground at hospitals, for example? Or do we need specialist skills in order to meet the needs today?
I definitely think that the skill sets are there. So, I mean, if you take a look at the managed security services or even the managed services, they're used to dealing with ERP systems and the CRM systems and everything that keeps their manufacturers or those sales organizations and keeping all of them going. So all of that really translates very well into the EMR or the EHR systems, the electronic medical and health records that are in there. So same thing, a lot of those similarities are in there. It's really just a change of terminology and understanding a lot of the language, understanding the HIPAA regulations. But even then, there's so much overlap between that and so many of the other, with the PCI requirements or the GLBA or the Sarbanes-Oxley. So there's so much overlap that everybody already understands what those security requirements are. Is just understanding some of those fine nuances and the languages. But I think the biggest gap would be understanding a lot of more of the Internet of Things, like all the IAT devices that get plugged into the devices or into the systems within the hospital. So there's so many imaging machines, there's so many other components related to patient healthcare that a lot of that data gets sent out to third-party providers. The machines themselves might be semi-managed, but not necessarily always from a security perspective. And so having that lens of going through, and then same thing with a security event. the old mindset of thinking. You kind of need to get a new lens or a new perspective when you're viewing things. Like in the old ways, if you got ransomware, it would be like, okay, unplug everything and take it off the network. And you can't really do that in healthcare because it might be, you know, directly tied to a patient healthcare, directly to life support, or maybe it might be systems that are monitoring life support or very patient direct things. So having that filter of not having that knee-jerk reaction of unplugging from the network and then, you know, needing to go through and actually think first, what would be the reaction? I need to get a replacement system first, then get that tied in before I plug in. And so it's really just a change of lens and perspective, and then understanding some new languages and terminologies to kind of link, you know, the kind of old ways to do things and be able to train your internal staff, having a few repetitions on being able to do that. And I think that can be able to be a good bridge into be able to developing that managed healthcare security services and being able to speak the language and to really make the healthcare systems feel comfortable that, hey, they really do have it. They understand me. They understand my security risks. They understand my our industry requirements. They understand our vendor requirements, and they would be able to meet our needs. And from that.
Yeah, and I think you raised a very good point there, right? The equation between, you know, IT, healthcare IT from, you know, 20 years ago has changed drastically, right? You mentioned about healthcare IoT, right? The number of medical devices on the network, which may be keeping patients alive, that you can't kick, you can't disconnect, right? When it becomes infected, because it takes the patient with them. You can't really secure a lot of these devices. How are each of the panelists going about, you know, identifying the massive number of medical devices that are on the networks, their healthcare networks, and managing risk around those devices? Christian, can we start with you, perhaps?
Sure. You know, I have just a very simple way to approach the handling of IoT devices. And it may sound silly, but to me, it's identify, verify, and rectify, right? And so you have to identify actually what you have. A lot of us, to some degree, claim that we know what we have in the environment from a device perspective, but the truth is there's probably more than we think there is in our environment. The second one, we have to verify its actual use. Is there a reason why these devices exist in the environment today? And then thirdly, actually taking some level of action against those devices to identify whether or not they're legitimate and whether or not they're operating in the capacities they're supposed to. I go back to the topic that we kicked off this discussion with, resources, your team. I think it's crucial that you have a team that has a mindset of knowing how to manage these devices. You can put all the tools in the world, but if you're not able to manage the tools, then the management of the environment becomes itself unmanageable. And so what we're doing today, what we have done in the past and we're doing at a higher capacity now, is identifying, truly understanding what we have in our environment. Second, we're building relationships between, or furthering the relationships between us and other teams in the business, such as the biomedical team and so on, to truly develop that bridge. But we're not doing it in a way to just create noise, right? We're trying to do actionable processes, or we're putting processes that are actionable between both our teams, where we're collecting the data, understanding where it actually applies in a positive and or negative way, whatever the situation might be, and then developing a work plan that we all are tracking through one of our ITSM tools, and really going through that process to remediate. The problem that we're running into, remediation in some cases, and Brett mentioned this just a second ago, you can't just unplug things in healthcare IT, right? I can't just walk into for example, a heart machine and just unplug it, right? You have to be able to have